Tate Chronicles now transmitting.
Welcome to the Tate Chronicles on Healthcare Now Radio. And now, here's your host, Jim Tate.
Good day, citizens of the free world, from border to border, coast to coast, and to all the ships at sea, I bring you a warm welcome. This is your correspondent, Jim Tate, and thank you for tuning into the Tate Chronicles. Join me as we cut through the fog that exists at the leading edge of healthcare technology. I'm really excited today. My guest is Daniel Abrams. Daniel is the CEO and CTO of MassLight, and he's the acting CTO for many startups. Interestingly enough, he holds a degree in anthropology, was a software engineer at Apple, and he founded MassLight's Build for Equity program to support founders struggling with technology. MassLight provides product teams to help qualified founders launch digital health startups. Daniel, welcome to the Tate Chronicles.
Thanks so much, Jim. It's really a pleasure to be here.
I'm really fascinated with this whole concept because you supply services to startups, in particular with focus on healthcare startups. And do these startups, potential startups, do they have to really be advanced and think they have the next big thing, or maybe they just have a great idea? What services do you supply to these folks?
So we very much consider ourselves an early stage investor, and we're a little unusual in that we work with startups all the way from inception. So starting with idea stage to just around Series A. If they get beyond that, they're usually at the point when they don't need the specialized type of services that we provide. But that's our usual range from idea stage to Series A.
Well, and so let's talk about those services. If I came up with a healthcare idea I thought had potential in the market, possibly disruptive, but certainly something that brought value, but I haven't done anything from a development standpoint, I just came to you. Could you take it from there, or are you actually supplying some technical development?
That is the way that we view ourselves, as being a little unique and different from most early stage investors. So we're similar to early stage investors in that we provide capital to early stage startups. But the thing that we do that is a little unique is that we provide these teams of full-time software engineers and quality assurance engineers and product folks to really get down in the trenches with the founders and help them build and launch the product.
And so beyond just the technical aspects, do you help with maybe market due diligence and potential things like that?
We do. So when we started out doing Build for Equity, our initial idea was that we would only provide technical services, but it became apparent pretty quickly that there was a suite of other services that founders could really benefit from. And so you can imagine a founder might come to us and they might have a lot of experience in a particular aspect of healthcare or health delivery. They might have a vision for a product, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're an expert, say, in digital marketing and understanding how to set up a marketing campaign. And so over the years, we've also added support for services that are not strictly technical, but are there to help founders launch their product in non-technical ways like marketing.
We'll get into the application process in a little bit, but how do folks hear about you? Do you go out and are you looking, or do people know about you and contact you, or is it all of the above?
When we started out, it was entirely organic. So we just talked to founders. We started accepting founders and working with them, and then they would let their friends know, and we started seeing applications grow basically through word of mouth. But after a certain point, probably about 2 years ago, we decided that it made sense. We'd achieved a certain level of scale and we had a certain reputation doing this Build for Equity work that we decided to also engage in professional marketing. And so now we participate in industry events, and we do outreach, and we do all these sorts of marketing activities to let people know that we're out there as well.
Daniel, I would guess you get the full range quality of applications from folks that don't have any shot at all to folks who come with you and really have something that excites you. And so over time, I'm just kind of curious about the business you're in. How has the quality of those applications changed over time, or has it?
It has changed to a degree. As it became clear to startups that we had this focus on health tech and medical startups, in particular, the quality in that market got higher and higher. So we developed a reputation as being not just very high quality software engineers, but high quality technical folks who understood HIPAA and the regulatory environment, understood how to build systems that could do interactions with EHRs and hospital systems. And so particularly for founders who had those needs, we were a very appealing option. And also, as a result, the quality of the applications coming in was higher. But you're also right in that we get applications that are all over the map. This is probably true for investors in general, but people come and some are well prepared and some are not. And we try to be thoughtful about the fact that even if an application seems like it's not necessarily a good investment for our sort of services, that these are people's dreams and they're things that they care a lot about. And so we try to be helpful where we can, even if we can't provide services, and give good feedback and just handle these things gently, even if the quality is not necessarily where we would like it to be in some cases.
In terms of the startup domains, what caused you to be focused primarily on healthcare startups?
There were a couple of reasons. One is that as a team, we had a sense that we wanted to be focused on vertical markets where we felt like we were making a positive difference in the world. And we looked around and we had this idea that there was just a lot of room for technical improvement in health, in the way healthcare was delivered. And I think everyone can see that, both from the clinical side and from the patient side. And so it was an area we had always been interested in. It was an area we had done some work in even before starting this Build for Equity program. And then things kind of snowballed from there. The very first startups that we worked with happened to be in that market. And so one thing led to another, where we both built technical knowledge of how to build these types of apps in a way that let us stand out, and also just reputation. So startups that were focused in that area came to see us as a really both viable and ideal option. And so I think it wasn't necessarily an absolute intention starting out, but it started out as an interest area and then became something that we really became more and more committed to over time.
Well, it's certainly an area where the whole domain is just ripe for disruption in so many aspects, not only from the clinical data, but to reimbursement and prior authorizations, just so many things. But could you share with us a few of the healthcare-related startups in your portfolio?
Sure. I'd like to talk about two in particular, I think.
Great.
But one is the very first startup that we ever worked with. So this was a company called Pacify. They provide telemedicine to new moms. So they provide instant access within 20 or 30 seconds to lactation consultants and pediatric nurses. And the idea for the startup was, once the pediatrician's office closed at 5 or 6 o'clock, it was really hard for moms to get support. And they were winding up in the emergency room in situations that everyone knew maybe wasn't quite an emergency, but no one was sure. And, you do what's best for your baby. And so they were trying to solve this problem. And it was intriguing to us. And so the founders had a very deep background in delivering healthcare services. They did not have a technical background. They had been working with a fee-for-service offshoring firm to try and get the MVP built. It was not working out very well because there was a misalignment of interest. The firm that they were working with wanted to get the product out as quickly as possible and move on, even if there were holes in the product. And obviously the founders were thinking long-term. So they asked us to come in and take over. The product had never launched at that point. So it was really an idea, but they had been working on it for about a year or so. So we came in, we determined that the technical infrastructure was deficient, effectively rewrote it, got their product launched, and it ended up becoming a blueprint for these built for equity services. And we participated in every single round that they fundraised under. So I think they went on and did 4 or 5 more rounds over the years. We participated in every single one of those rounds. And ultimately, they were acquired by a much larger healthcare organization. And we still work with that organization to this day. So it was great. And really, it kind of set the stage for us understanding both how to make these investments, because we came at this from a technical background. My background, like you mentioned, is as a software engineer, not as an investor or a VC. So it really helped us understand a lot about how to structure these investments. And then just personally and professionally was very, very rewarding. And so that's one I want to call out. And then the other one I want to mention is kind of the other side, which is a much bigger organization. I mean, they're a startup, but in that kind of big startup sense, and that's an organization called PM Pediatrics. So they are a pediatric urgent care facility. At this point, they're actually one of the largest, if not the largest, pediatric urgent care organizations in the country. They have clinics up and down the East Coast, and they are, in some sense, a traditional brick and mortar shop, although they have a lot of telemedicine too, in that you show up with your child is sick, and you show up to their urgent care facility. And so I mention them because I like to think a lot about this model of taking traditional healthcare, which has not gone away. People still need to go in and see their doctors, but being able to provide products to organizations like this that are really striving to deliver better experience for both their clinicians and for their patients. And so we're working with them to build out an entire EHR. So they have an existing EHR, and it's one of the traditional vendors, which offers all sorts of limitations in terms of both the clinical and patient experience. And they really want to deliver something better. And so we're working with them to do that. And I really like their approach. So that's another one I want to talk about.
You mentioned that first one, Pacify, that has gone through several rounds of funding. Did you provide guidance to them on how to go for additional funding and how to structure that, kind of the legal aspects?
We did. In particular, that's something we do even more of now. So when Pacify was the very first one we did, and when we got into this, both we and the founders were learning as we went in terms of the fundraising process. But what became pretty clear as we did more and more of these deals was it was important to help the founders position themselves well and survive the fundraising process. So if you think of the trajectory of startups that go through a program like ours, most of them want to go on to raise subsequent rounds of institutional capital. Not all of them. There are some startups that kind of grow organically and decide that's the path, and that's fine. But most of them want to go on and raise capital, and most founders don't necessarily have a lot of experience doing that. So that's an area that will be devoted to helping those startups position themselves correctly. And also, we realized it became necessary to develop relationships with VCs, particularly VCs in the vertical market that we were interested in. And so we spent a lot of time cultivating those relationships too, so we can say when a startup is ready to kind of graduate from what we've done, or even if they're still working with us, if they're just going to raise capital at that point, we can say, oh, we can facilitate an introduction with this particular firm, and we think you're a really good fit for their thesis. And so we help the startups both not only position themselves, but actually get in the door with VCs that we think are probably a good fit for them.
To our audience, if you're just joining this episode, I'm Jim Tate. And today on the Tate Chronicles, I'm speaking with Daniel Abrams, the CEO of MassLight. Daniel, how much, how much equity does MassLight take for your services?
So we structure what we call a standard deal for an early stage startup. We provide $100,000 and between 3,000 to 5,000 hours of software engineering and other services. And we typically take 20% equity. Now, there's a process by which startups can request an exception. So in some cases, a startup might be further along. They might have raised institutional capital at a particular valuation. They might have industry traction. So we have a process where we make a valuation determination if the startup is outside of the standard set of terms. But those are the standard terms that by default we start with.
Do you work with part-time founders, or what type of founders are you looking for?
In general, we're looking for full-time founders. So this is how we think about it. When we commit to a startup, we are all in. We are committing our team full-time every day, working to make sure that that startup is successful. We're not ourselves part-time. We're doing everything we can, and we want to see the same for founders. Now, sometimes founders will come to us with a plan where they outline when it makes sense for them to be full-time. So it may be that they're just at the idea stage and they're not yet full-time. And that's okay. We're happy to talk to those founders, but there needs to be a plan in place that outlines, okay, we understand that MassLight is going to be devoting its resources full-time. And here's when we as founders intend to do the same.
Well, and that kind of leads me to another question. If you could maybe give me a composite of who or what an ideal founder would be for you.
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. So typically, we're looking at non-technical founders as our ideal partner. It's not always true, but most of the time, the founders who are best suited to being partners of ours and needing the type of investment we provide is someone who has fairly deep experience in a particular vertical market. So typically healthcare, medical. They might have worked there in that market for 10 or 15 years. They have enough industry experience to have a vision for a product. So they said, okay, I can see a hole or a pain point in this market that I know needs to be solved. I have a pretty clear understanding of how to solve it. And then, in addition to understanding how to solve it, I have the ability, if that product existed, to go out and sell it. So I have built up a Rolodex of contacts, or I understand how to speak the language for my potential customers, such that if the product existed, I can go out and sell that product. And what I really, really need that I don't have is the technical wherewithal to build that product. And so when founders come to us, and that's kind of the profile, that for us is ideal.
I know you work virtually, I imagine, but where are you actually based, Daniel?
I'm in DC. I've been here for a very long time.
Okay. And when did MassLight get founded? When did you launch?
We founded way back in 2000. We started out actually as a very traditional fee-for-service software consultancy. So we started out building iOS, Android, and web applications, and we did that primarily for very large companies. So we did it for Fortune 100 companies, for the US government, and we grew the company to a reasonable size. And it wasn't until about 8 years ago or so that we had grown and felt comfortable beginning to do these seed investments. And so we started doing seed investments. And that was kind of when we had this aha moment to realize, oh, maybe there's a need in the startup community for not solely capital, but even the type of services that we provided. And, you know, we had never worked with startups before. It just didn't really make sense under kind of a traditional software consultancy model. In other words, the fees that we charged to large organizations just would never have made sense for a startup. And so it wasn't really something that we had considered. But then once we reached the point where we were doing these investments and talking to founders, I thought, oh, well, there's a need here, and maybe there's a way for us to do this. We had been around long enough and had a, stable enough base of capital that we could provide this type of investment services, and so that's what happened.
Let's talk a little bit about the application process. So let's say I've heard about MassLight, and I have what I think is a great idea, and I have domain knowledge. How would I contact MassLight, and what's the process of applying?
So the first step is just to go to our website. We try and make it really easy to apply. There's two ways. If you have a pitch deck already, you're welcome just to upload that pitch deck and we'll review it, and that's fine. If you don't, we also have a form where you can fill out some information about the company and we'll review that. And I personally review every one of those applications that come in. So everyone that comes in, I take a look at along with the rest of our team, and we decide which ones make sense to move forward. And then when we move forward, there's, 2 or 3 more steps in our process. Typically, the next step is we'll set up a one-on-one meeting with the founders, and I'll talk to them. And so what we're looking there is a little bit of background beyond what we see in the pitch deck. So why did the founders decide to tackle this problem? And have they learned, how far along have they gotten? And have they learned anything along the way? Have they made changes? So we want to understand not just where the idea or the business is today, but the thought process. And then if we agree and the founders agree that it makes sense to move forward from there, we schedule what we call a formal pitch, although it's really more like a conversation. So we allot 30 minutes. We have the entire team on our side there, and the entire team means both the technical team and the business folks to review that pitch. Mm-hmm. We ask the founders actually to spend no more than about 5 minutes on the pitch, because we come in pretty knowledgeable with all the information that the founders have submitted, as well as research that we've done. And we spend 25 minutes doing a longer and more substantive Q&A. If we get through that pitch and both the founders and we decide it makes sense to move forward, we do a technical scoping. So we sit down with the founders and say, over the next 6 to 12 months, what does the business need to do to be successful? And we then take those business goals and reverse engineer them into a set of technical milestones or deliverables. So what software or other technical pieces need to be in place for that business to hit those milestones, scope them out, ensure that we're on the same page as the founders in terms of being able to deliver them, and make sure that we feel confident that we have the team necessary to do that. And assuming that that we all feel good at that point, that's it. We sign the agreement.
Daniel, it's hard to believe, but we're almost totally out of time. But how can listeners find out more about MassLight? What's your website?
So our website is masslight.com, masslight.com. We have a bunch of information there about the type of investment and services that we do, but we're also very open. So if there's information that or questions that your listeners may have them. We have a form, and have them drop that question there, and they may be surprised how quickly they get an answer.
Okay, great. Well, to our audience, thanks for joining me on this episode of the Tate Chronicles. I offer a special salute to my guest today, Daniel Abrams of MassLight. Daniel, thanks for coming aboard today.
Thank you so much, Jim. It was really a pleasure being here. I appreciate it.
I enjoyed it. You can find more information on this show's program page at Healthcare Now Radio. That's healthcarenowradio.com. Until we meet again, here's wishing you smooth sailing and safe harbors.
Tate Chronicles transmission ending now.